Hello, all, and welcome back to another episode of the Youth Edition of Apostles for Jesus. I'm Adam Murphy, and I'm here with my co-host, Father Michael Marcantoni. Father, how you doing today? Are you muted, Father?
Oh my goodness. Is that better? Is that better?
Aha,
Can you
there
hear
you
me?
are.
All right. I've often been told I sound better on mute anyway. So there you go. But yeah, no, but but yeah, very good day, doing all right, and excited to be here with you tonight. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank God. Busy day, long day, but got it in and got the work done, and here we are for another episode to be with our friends from near and far over the interwebs. And we hope that you all are well and healthy today. And today's episode, like all our previous episodes, is touching on a very important subject. And, we can relate it to the feast day that we had just this past Sunday in some ways, but we also can relate it to other things in our lives, and it's not necessarily something that's bad. Um, and we're going to touch on that as well. Father, can you introduce the topic for us?
Yeah, excellent. So I do want to say to everybody, of course, happy Ecclesiastical New Year. Today, September 1st, is the first day of the year for us as Orthodox Christians. And before we get into the topic, I want to point out to people, and this is something I always like to mention every chance I get around this time of the year. Ecclesiastical New Year is September 1st. The first great feast of the year is September 8th, the Nativity of the Theotokos. The last great feast is August 15th, the Dormition of the Theotokos. And as Orthodox Christians, so we have our whole year bookended by the life of this great lady. And of course, in that context, all the saints that make up the great cloud of witnesses of the church, which of course goes into what we're talking about today, because we are talking about the company you keep. And obviously, this is there's like three angles to this actually, and we're going to talk about all three of them. The first is right as kind of our title for today suggests, the what it can be like to have the wrong company, bad company. I can't deny. and to kind of find ourselves saying, hey, everyone else is doing it. Why shouldn't I do it as well? And it's real easy to find those sort of negative examples. I think that'll be the first thing we talk about. But then, after seeing the effects of, men, you probably heard your parents and your grandparents or your godparents harp on you about being around the wrong people. So there's that. But there's also the right people. There's also the good company we can keep, right? If we're talking about that great cloud of witnesses, or we're talking about the good people in our life who influence us to good things. And, interestingly enough, we could pose the same question. Everyone else is doing it, so why shouldn't I? Well, from the negative people doing the wrong things, who, if we say, well, everyone else is doing it, why shouldn't I? But if we have the right people around us and with the right influences around us, we can look at them and say, well, they're all doing these wonderful, big, amazing things. Why shouldn't I? See, it's the same question, but which one we're looking at makes a world of difference when it comes to what we're talking about. Um, and then, of course, there's the third part of this conversation where we're asking the question is, well, in that group, who am I? Because it's not, we're not just, you guys are not just passive receivers of the influences of the people around you. You're also influencing them. So, believe it or not, many of them may go on and do great things because of what they've seen in you. What are you bringing to that circle as an Orthodox Christian? And unfortunately, sometimes when we make the wrong choices, we may find out that some of the people in that group have suffered because of us. So again, there's that. The third part of that is, well, who am I in this mix? Because just like they're influencing me, I'm influencing them. So let's talk about all those things. So let's start with the bad news. Good news, bad news. Let's start with the bad news. So we only have positive places to go from here. Um, I will say this: my grandmother. I remember learning the phrase from her: "Dime con quién andas y te diré quién eres." Tell me who you walk with, and I'll tell you who you are. Or the in English, I found out later, there's that saying, "You're known by the company you keep." So, what about having some of these wrong people in our lives and the places it can lead us? And if it looks like everyone we know is going down those quote unquote wrong roads, are they really all that wrong? What do you think, Adam? How do we deal with that?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, in First Corinthians, I think it's 15, um, be not deceived, bad company corrupts good morals, right? So if we're around people that aren't necessarily the greatest people, whether they're doing drugs or they're doing, abusing things, or they're talking about guys or girls in abusive ways, like that's going to corrupt how we perceive the world. And so if we're hanging around this crowd, it's going to influence how what we do and how we're colored by these things in our lives and by these influences. And so we need to be really careful about that and make sure and ask, like, be not like not to be afraid of our priest, not to be afraid of having mentors who are older than us. And that's such a great thing about having a church community to go to. It's one of the last places in our society where we can go and we can meet people that are not our age, that are older than us, that have life experience, right? And so that company that we keep, oftentimes, more often than not, has a positive influence on us and can do great things for how we live our lives, how we perceive our lives, how we make decisions. And so this is, an example of the two poles of, who we choose to keep in our lives. And so, Father, like you were speaking about, it's really important to just be really aware of who we're hanging out with and what influence they're having on our life.
Well, and you mentioned something. You mentioned something very very good there, coming from Corinthians. The reason why all of these things and all these people have an influence on us is because they become part of the narrative that we put in our heads. As human beings, when in Genesis, where it says we're made in the image and likeness of God, um, a good way of translating that is that we are the imagers of God, right? We from just the earliest days after birth, we naturally image and imitate what we have around us. And we don't have to be told to do that. Like, we learn by imitation. That's how you all learned to speak. I don't know if you have little cousins or brothers or sisters, but if you watch a baby or a toddler interact with the world, they're just imitating everything they see, irrespective of whether they should or not. So I remember my son when he was about 18 months old. I was a deacon already, and it was like the night before my ordination to the priesthood, and we had all this family over, and where it was a very exciting time. And he was 18 months old, and my dad or one of my uncles said something really funny, and everyone in the room just started laughing really hard. It was great. And as soon as we like the laughter started to die down, my son started laughing. Like, he started laughing hard because he was copying it as like, oh, I'm supposed to laugh. Like, he didn't, like, whatever was said, he didn't get it, but he knew, oh, that's what we're doing. We're making that noise now. Um, so that's part of it. We're going to image the group that we keep around, and that's not just in the matter of human beings. It's also in the material. The company that you keep is also the stuff that you put in your head. If we're putting a lot of sort of morbid and depressive things in front of our eyes, in front of our minds, in between our ears, we shouldn't be surprised if suddenly we begin to, behave and think and react in ways that correspond to that. You start to what you put in front of you, the narrative that you put inside your mind by the company that you keep, not just the people who you're around, but the things that you consume into your mind and into your heart. That also becomes the company. And that's company that really sticks with you because, maybe your friends at school, you might really get to interact with them for maybe an hour a day during lunch or something. But the stuff that you've really saturated your mind with, that's going to be with you all day long, from the time you wake up to the time you go to bed. And if it's really weighing you down, you can dream about it and never get an escape. And so you start to get a look at, like, why, when you go to church and you're like, Mom, Dad, why are the prayers and hymns so repetitive? Well, the things that we repeat really stick with us and really ingrain in us. And we're trying to help you take it everywhere. Um, but yeah, that's all part of the company that you keep. Like, what are you consuming and keeping in your mind? And what's interesting is when you're going to attract and be around the kind of people that match up with that. So I guess so it's not just like, who do I happen to be around? It's like, no, who am I training myself to be? And as a virtue of that, who am I going around? So, does this ever go right? If obviously, um, we can think of bad influences, people who go the wrong places on the internet, God forbid, or the friends who offer us substances that we have no business polluting the temple of our body with. But does this ever go right, Adam? Do we ever get steered in the right direction?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we can come back to the discussion that we had with Father Nico a few weeks ago about talking about summer camp, right? Most people, I won't say all, because I'm sure there's some young folks that, camp's just not for them. But, most people leave camp having had an amazing experience and really being enriched by a culture and a community of believers of the same age that really has led them to a more beautiful and holy life with Christ. And so we see these examples, when people live in community, for instance, monks and nuns, when they live in a monastery, or people when they're part of a group. It doesn't necessarily need to be a church group, um, but athletics. Like if you're doing jujitsu, or if you're doing martial arts and you're part of a dojo, or you go somewhere in community, you learn from the other people that are there, and you get support from the other people that are there, and there's a sense of kinship that's formed that really brings positivity, challenges you, and reinforces all of the good things that you're learning there, and points out your flaws, really. And so, yeah, there definitely are places and people that you can be around that have that opposite effect, that really enrich your life, make it beautiful, make it more full and holy. So yeah, that's definitely a thing, Father.
Yeah, and so like interestingly enough, because I think, and also harking back to a past episode, when we touched on like addiction and things. So in the language of recovery, and sad to say, the reality is some of you watching this are going to need help at some point, and that's okay. And you should ask for it. You should seek it out. Everybody throughout their lives needs help with one thing or another. It may not always be addiction, but you'll have some other problem. There is like Job, there is always a crisis for every life in some way, shape, or form. They don't. So that should give us a measure of humility and mercy towards one another, because maybe today I'm the one who needs to be lifted up, but tomorrow it'll be your turn, and if I'm now strong I can lift you up, and then if I need help again you'll be there. And so again, that's the way the church should work. Well, in recovery circles they say that addiction is a disease of isolation, and that healing happens in community. So when you've got yourself surrounded by others, surrounded by influences, surrounded by material that is encouraging you to get up and right the ship, get your life on the right track, that's the path to actually getting there. Um, it's very rare. You mentioned monks and nuns. It's very rare to have an actual hermit. For the most part, monastics live in community, and sometimes that community is very small. Sometimes it might be like a monk with one disciple or two disciples or something like that. It could be a very small community, but for someone to be in total isolation, a recluse, is very rare, and that's because Orthodoxy recognizes that most people are not going to get good results like that. Some people will. There's always the outlier. There's always someone that God is going to work through in some unique way. But for the most part, it's in community, even if it's a community that's very small. And and what's interesting is that when we look at sort of that communal life, and we look and we say, well, either the influences that I have that are good or bad are pulling me maybe towards, whether it's towards drugs, towards crime, towards whatever else. Um, that becomes part of a culture that we immerse ourselves in. So for example, when you look at the military, there's no shortage of people in the military who really only make it through things because of the people around them. It's no secret that soldiers on the battlefield don't fight for the generals, and they don't even fight for the cause. They fight for the soldier to their left and to their right. That's who they care about bringing home. And I had one such experience like that myself. So when I was in basic training, I had never been, even though I had been athletic. in high school, running had never been my thing. And there was this day that we had eaten our first MREs, the heavy, just calorie dense meals ready to eat. And then they took us out on the road for just this god awful running. It was miserable. And I was ready to fall out of the formation. Like I was whooped. I was beyond done. And I felt this hand on my back. And the soldier behind me, he kept his hand on my back. He's like, let's go, keep going, keep going. And he kept it there till we made it back to the barracks. And we were in different platoons, even though we were in the same barracks. And so I thanked him, and he went his way. And then by the end of training, when we were all in airborne school, going out of the plane, I happened to be behind him. Like you couldn't have planned it. So where he was behind me for that run at the beginning, I was behind him on the stick in the plane going out when we got done, when we got through airborne school after AIT, after basic, after all that. So what does that tell you? That tells you that the community that you keep, it really can keep you going beyond where you think you're done. Keeping a good community with you can get you places that you could not go on your own. It's part of the reason why the church is a community. Our chances of living a holy Christ-like life in isolation are not good. That's how the devil tempts Eve, right? He has to isolate her. He has to get her away from the team, away from Adam, and now he can tempt her. In isolation, we're in a lot of trouble. But but on part of the right team, we can go farther than we would believe we could otherwise. And for some of you, you're going to look back, and some of you are going to get done with high school, and you're going to look back and say, I might have gotten involved in drugs or small crime if I didn't have my football team or my soccer team, if I wasn't doing theater. I knew a lot of guys who, because like wrestling is a very demanding schedule, like the thing that kept them out of out of parties where the rest of their friends would like get arrested or get in fights, because they were wrestling. They had to be, they had hours of training and practice, and then they had a match in the morning. They weren't going out at midnight, 11 p.m. They had to sleep so they wouldn't lose the next day. Keeping a good team around you is essential. So it really can go right, and it really can take you farther than you're going to get on your own. But it's not just the stuff that you're putting into your head and the people you're keeping around. Someone is keeping you around, and you're influencing someone's life as well. So what about So who have you influenced? Like you've been around a lot of people. What kind of stories do you have about that? Like maybe even about yourself?
Well, I just wanted to bring up, to your point, examples in the church that we have of this. And so on one hand, like last Sunday, we had the feast day of the beheading of John the Baptist, right? And so John's head was asked for when Herod wanted to please, sorry, Father, who was he pleasing? What was her name? Why am I blanking on it?
I want to say Salome. It's not Salome. No. You know what? I'm blanking on it too.
I'm blanking on it. Not anyhow, but he wanted to be a people pleaser. He was a people pleaser. He was a people pleaser, though, and so he was following the crowd. And so
Herodias. Sorry, Herodias.
Yes.
Herodias.
And so he's pleasing the crowd, and he then fulfilled that and had John's head delivered on a platter. And so he didn't want to let his reputation get let down with all the people and look like he wasn't a man of his word. And so he was following the crowd and was a people pleaser, right? But on the other hand, we have examples like the 40 martyrs of Sebaste, right? And there was 40 martyrs. One left the ranks when it got too cold. They were driven into a freezing lake, right? And then one of the Roman soldiers who was there saw their love for Christ and their willingness to be martyred, and he joined them. even though he knew that he would die a martyr, and even though he was in the ranks of the Roman centurion and the Roman guard uh, who was persecuting the Christians, he went into the lake and he proclaimed himself a Christian. Right? We have a more modern example, the Coptic martyrs in Libya. Right? There was one guy who was working with them, who was he was from somewhere more south in Africa, and darker skin, wasn't Coptic, wasn't Orthodox, wasn't Christian, and he saw that ISIS had them, and had abducted them, and he went with them because he saw their love for Christ, and he went to his death on the beach with them. Right? And so there's these examples, rich examples in the church, from the lives of the saints that we have, even to our modern day, right? Of the influence that crowds can have on us, and what the difference is in a life in Christ, and how Christ can free us from being influenced in a bad way, and what a life in Christ and holiness, right, gives us. And so I think that those are really powerful testimonies. And like your example shows, that we can really push forward. And when we're feeling weak, we have the cloud of witnesses, right, with us, the saints, the angels, our guardian angel, that whole host, that multitude of holy ones, of both people who are seen and unseen angelic powers with us. To be with us, just like your fellow soldier had their hand on your back. And I mean, I've counseled at many camps, and so I've seen transformational experiences happen, where I was able to lead groups of people, young people, to a deeper love for Christ. But it's not about one person, right? And life isn't about a thing, it's about a person, and it's about then our neighbor. Love God, the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, strength, and mind, and love your neighbors yourself, right? So we have this dynamic that it's not a personal transformation of the will. Everything happens in symphony and in harmony with God and with neighbor, right? And in yourself. This kind of transformation for the better. Or we can get drawn and influenced to do bad things.
Thank you. Yeah, and interestingly enough, like on the case of Herod and John the Baptist, like if you're looking at the fact, like, well, he swore an oath. There is a provision in the Mosaic Law for how to be absolved of a rashly made oath or promise. Like there was provision within the religious law of the day that, okay, you said you were going to do something, you said it rashly and it was foolish. Here's what you do to set the ship right. Like, so he didn't, it's like he didn't have to go through with what he did. It was that his pride was more important. It would have taken a measure of humility that was just too much for him. And that's really where that's really the dividing thing. So it's like, yes, sometimes we may find ourselves in over our heads, and there really is a way out, and it might mean a little bit of humility up front. It's definitely well worth it. Um, so I think when we're looking at that, it's very, there may be plenty of people watching that say, well, that sounds all well and good if you're getting it right ahead of time, but what happens if I'm already in a bad place? Well, there, you go to your priest, you go to your church, you go to your community. The reality is the people who are on your team and want you to succeed will be overjoyed for you to decide to do the right thing, and they will do everything possible to help you get things right because they want to see you do well. The people that we're most afraid of feeling embarrassed in front of, the people who should love us, they want to see us do well. So it's, if we come and say, hey, I need help getting out of this bad position I've put myself in, they're like, kind of like a doctor doesn't get mad at sick people. They're gonna be like, I'm really glad you've decided to change things. Let's do it. Let's get after it. And they're going to help you. And those are going to be your best friends. Now, the other thing to your point, um, the other thing to your point, like you said about the Holy 40 Martyrs, it what was interesting about them, like that, it wasn't just it went both. That particular story went both ways. One of them, one of the original 40 martyrs, gave up and left the frozen lake, and now there were 39. And one of the Roman soldiers standing by was so inspired by their steadfastness that he went out and took his place. So, like right there, you could see sort of the microcosm of what we're talking about. One of them was influenced in the wrong by the stuff that was around them. The pressure was too much. One of them was inspired by the holy example that he saw and went to not just certain death, but also certain sainthood in Christ in just an instant. So, it really can cut both ways. And in the life of each of us, this isn't just something that we take in. You are also going to be that person for someone else.
Yeah, Father, we
So
have a question. We have a
I
question. We're
can
going to be
see.
wrapping. We're going to be wrapping up a little shortly, but we want to get to this question. How can one live in an environment that might be toxic, or they might be having bad influences around them? Or how does that person stay in that environment and become the leaven, right? Become the good, the agent of good, the agent of change in that environment. From my personal experience, it's really hard to discern whether you are being that positive change if the environment is really toxic. If you can get people on your side and find the people who are good influences in that environment and stick with them by your example and by hanging around those people, you have power in numbers. But if you want to stay yourself, just one person in a toxic situation, uh, you're really kind of putting yourself in a precarious situation that you then might slip up, or you might then be associated with and complicit in a crime that happens, in something bad that happens. So you have to be really careful about it. And again, go to your mentors, go to your coach, somebody older than you, a family member who you trust, your priest, your spiritual father, and discuss this situation with them. Because these situations take a lot of guidance and a lot of grace and a lot of really prayerful discernment. You know, praying that God will guide your steps in this.
I think prayerful is the right word. I would use that word because it's going to be, in order to do that, like we said, isolation is usually death. So one of the biggest things you're going to run into is if you try to be that in isolation, you're going to get prideful, but you're also going to get exhausted. And chances are it might not last. So you have to first you set a firm purpose, like your priority is living faithfully to the gospel. You may or may not have much of a choice as to who you are in a given environment or how long you're there. You usually do. Um, and then you start to set boundaries too. Say, well, how can I live here and still be faithful to the gospel? Not like, oh, I'm the one who's going to. Don't get a self-important view of what you're going to do here. Have a sober accounting of how you can live the gospel faithfully in a given environment. Period. Stop. Then put the boundaries in place that will keep that safe, like the walls around the Garden of Eden. So, as the more toxic the environment and the longer you're there, I guarantee you, the bigger those boundaries are going to get because people will infringe and you'll start to get tired. And there's going to come a point in time where you'll need to move on. And that's going to happen. And when that does come, you go your way in peace and with a clear conscience. So if you're somewhere that you have to be, live as faithfully as you can to the gospel, keep the boundaries in place that allow that to be possible, live prayerfully, discern carefully with your spiritual father, and there's going to come a time when you can move on. I've been around for 4 decades, and so far, I've been in a lot of environments. None of them have been permanent. Some of them have been really toxic and terrible. Some of them have been wonderful. In either case, none of them lasted. So, since none of it's going to last, live faithfully to the gospel, put the boundaries in place. And I can tell you, having good gospel, Christ focused boundaries, the times where I've been anywhere or lived in any way that I didn't have a bunch of regrets later, those were the times where I had the best boundaries, where I had the best parameters for myself. Is like, here's how I can be a faithful Orthodox Christian in this scenario. And I stuck with it. And those are the times that I do not regret. The times where I didn't almost always have some regrets. So.
Very good. All right. Well, everyone, if you are watching this later and you have questions for us, if you're watching it now and you didn't get a question in that you want answered, please put it in the comments in the YouTube, with the YouTube video, or on the Facebook page, and we'll answer them to the best of our ability on a chat, or in the comment below. And thank you so much again for being with us for this episode of the youth edition of Apostles for Jesus. Thank you, Father, again, as always. And we look forward to being with you next time.
God bless you. Thank you.